I have a question for you. Imagine you live in the horrible condition of a country torn apart by war. Your city is bombed many times and destruction and fear is everywhere. What would be your main concern? Would you think about protecting books? It seems that some people, even in the most desperate of situations, protect books and manuscripts. I love to share with you two non-fiction books that tell two recent stories of people that cohabit night and day with death and yet find the courage to protect books. Welcome back to Bold Books and Bones. I never knew that some people would give such high priority to books, even when they can hardly protect their own lives. By reading these two books, I learned that such extraordinary people really do exist. And I also learned that there are different reasons why they are willing to risk everything. The first book is called The Book Collectors of Daraya, and it was written by Tyne Cot. The second book is called The Book Smugglers of Timbuktu, written by Charlie English. In the story told by Charlie English, people hide and protect thousands of ancient manuscripts because these written documents represent the very identity of their culture. And that identity could be forever taken away from them because they are invaded by a group of people who are trapped and stuck in a single way of thinking. Anything that according to them lays beyond their way of perceiving the world will be destroyed. In the second story told by Tyne Cot, people collect and protect books because books are their passage to freedom and they are a protection against ignorance, which makes them vulnerable for the deception by their political leaders. The Book Smugglers of Timbuktu tells us about the existence of old books and manuscripts, but these very rare documents come from a place that is generally less well known as an old age center of learning. Because the author talks about the books that were written centuries ago in Mali, in West Africa. Timbuktu, a city in Mali that lays at the southern edge of the Sahara Desert, has been for a long time an important place of knowledge development. However, for many centuries, the fact that Africa had an extensive written culture was mostly ignored by the Western world. When these manuscripts were discovered in the 19th century by explorers from Europe, it shed a total new light on Africa because it showed that there was a vivid intellectual life in Timbuktu. And these and other later sources revealed that there were not only considerable libraries in the city, but also it revealed the existence of an important educational system. All these findings about Africa were contrary to the dominant belief of the European world at the time. They looked at Africa as a place without a written culture, let alone a culture of high-standing scholars with expertise in mathematics, astronomy, and history. So this information was available through men who explored Africa. However, as Charlie English puts it, after the exploration came, unfortunately, the exploitation of Africa. Now, this book felt to me as a gift. It brings an incredible, valuable, and a seldom told part of our human history about Africa and Europe. And it is also a gift because it is like two books in one. On the one hand, it is the extraordinary true story of librarians, like a man called Mr. Haidara, who risks his life to protect thousands of manuscripts from destruction. And on the other hand, it is a historical story of the discovery of Timbuktu by the Western world, of course. The author switches with every new chapter between the two narratives, and to me, this made this book even more compelling to read. The first story about the threat of the destruction of books and manuscripts is situated in 2012, when extremists occupied the country of Mr. Haidara. We learn from this book that soon after the occupation, they started to destroy important cultural heritage, like the destruction of Sufi shrines that were there for centuries and were, of course, important sacred places for the local people. It became also clear that the extremists were unstoppable and that the thousands of manuscripts that were stored across libraries in the city were under severe threat. The book gives us insight on how Mr. Haidara, in collaboration with others and with the financial support of international organizations, secretly started to evacuate many of these valuable manuscripts. A risky operation that took months and that was threatening constantly the lives of all who were involved. It is an incredible story about bravery, but also about people who protect and even save the identity of their community by protecting manuscripts, which are, of course, the voices of their ancestors. Imagine a totalitarian government would take over in your or my country or community, and they would destroy our libraries and archives. Suddenly the link with us and our past would be gone. We could not prove that the house in which we live would be really ours, because there wouldn't be any documents left that confirm our rights on the house. And we would not have access to what previous generations from our community had thought and said. The written traces of history would be wiped out, and as a result, our very identity would have been erased. And it would make us humans extremely vulnerable to those people who would have power over our country or community. Only what is in your and my memory would be what is left of our past. And this information would disappear once we would die. It's a chilling thought, but unfortunately a reality to many communities in the world today and throughout history. Therefore, this first story that Charlie English tells in his book about people who protected the manuscripts shows the indescribable value of what they did for their current community and for generations to come. Now, as mentioned, Charlie English also tells a second story in this book, and he interweaves it in a very clever way with the first one. In this second historical narrative, he describes how the West discovered Timbuktu and other parts of Africa, and how in those days the dominant Western way of thinking about this vast continent had led to the exploitation and to many tragedies for the local people. It is obvious that this book was written by a journalist who did his homework. He did extensive research and interviewed many people, and he also documented his sources in detail at the end of the book. So fact checks are possible. I think that this is the good answer to the challenges we currently face with misinformation and fake news. In short, I learned through this book many new things about West Africa, about old manuscripts that contained information about our human race that we even haven't translated yet. And most importantly, I learned about librarians like Mr. Haidara, who through their courage and ingenuity saved this human memory from destruction. I highly recommend this book, because Charlie English not only gives us in his well-researched book an account of the heroic deeds of the librarians who saved the books, but also he tells the story of Timbuktu, which was for centuries and still is today a center of learning, with in its heart a culture of handwritten texts. The second book is called The Book Collectors of Daraya. It is the true story of brave Syrian people living in the city of Daraya and who are resisting a government that does not allow a diversity of thinking, let alone a sense of freedom. The author Delphine Minoui reports in short chapters about the encounters with Ahmad, Omar, and other people who try to uphold a revolution and live in the devastating conditions of war. Destruction, famine, death, barrel bombs, sarin gas, and napalm bombs are their daily reality. We read how the men and women in Daraya were cut off from the rest of Syria and how they were cut off from the world. They had to totally rely on themselves in a place with no resources to fight or even to live. I found this book incredibly important. It describes this ongoing war, not from a telescopic perspective where we receive general reports about politics and about the statistics of war, like how many people were killed and how many bombs were dropped on a city and so on. Instead, Delphine tells us the story of the people living inside the besieged city. She shares in her book what she learned through countless Skype calls with a man called Ahmad. Ahmad and his fellow fighters are far away from the extremism and fanatism of some political and religious groups. We learn that he is a man that is trying to stay alive and who is fighting for a Syria where no one can dictate what you have to think or say. Between the rubble of the many destroyed houses, they find books, and Ahmed and other young men decide to collect them and to start an underground library. In each book that they save, they write the name of the owner of the house, so that one day after the war, the owners could come to the library and collect their property. This clandestine library becomes a door to knowledge for people who lived in a society where they never had the chance to explore a variety of thoughts and beliefs. We learn from Delphine which books are trending at a certain time in that underground library. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho and The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey are two examples of books that help the young fighters and other visitors to the library to reflect on their lives and on how they could improve themselves as human beings. At some point in the book, Ahmad confides that his only solace comes in reading the accounts of people who lived through similar experiences. And he refers in that context to books about the siege of Sarajevo. And at other times, it are the verses from the poet Mahmoud Darwish, in which these exhausted and sometimes desperate men find expressed in words what only they can truly understand, because of the extreme circumstances they live in. This book brings the human perspective on the war in Syria. I choked up more than once while reading this book because it is easy to relate to Ahmad and to other men and women in this story. They are people from all walks of life. However, their hopes and dreams for life are put on hold, or in many cases are totally destroyed. Also, I admire the dedication of the author Delphine to continuously reach out to them via Skype and to document the story of these fellow humans. Both books tell a universal story that can happen anywhere, and if we are not vigilant, can even repeat itself. I very much recommend both books. I hope you found this episode interesting, and I hope to see you again at the next episode of Bold Books and Bones. Bye for now.